In early 1915, Field Marshal Sir John French wrote to Colonel JFC Fuller requesting measures to counteract snipers. According to him, during operations in Belgium, many British officers and men fell victims to snipers. Under the conditions of trench warfare, they were considered very effective. Soon, it became one of the most important accessories for any rifle. Over time, snipers became very secretive, and their equipment became lighter and more compact, which allowed them to move around more easily. This is how they are still operating today. At first, the German Imperial Army were the only ones to seriously consider scoped rifles. As soon as the British and French were aware of the German successes with scoped rifles, they also introduced them to the battlefield. Even though sharpshooters existed before, it was the introduction of scopes that allowed them to shoot accurately at very long distances. With a scoped rifle, a good marksman was able to acquire his target very easily. He could kill an enemy that barely protruded his head over the trench parapet if he was fast enough. With such horrifying capabilities, snipers became an object of fear for the soldiers in the trenches, especially because they fired from well-concealed positions. Since the art of camouflaging was developing more and more as the war progressed, snipers became harder to detect. For soldiers whose everyday life was weighted by the threat of snipers, it became a necessity to counter this danger. With the awareness of the sniper threat widespread, soldiers paid a lot of attention not to expose themselves. This forced snipers to act quickly and to use the shortest moment to fire at the enemy. It was based on this hastiness that camouflage units designed their deception. Their intention was to force the enemy sniper into making a flawed decision and to draw out his fire so his position could be located. Most often they used papier-mâché heads, but there were other methods as well. One of them was the use of camouflage dummies. Camouflage dummies were very detailed models of soldiers. They were dressed in uniforms and were equipped with helmets and sometimes even gas masks. These dummies were usually placed near the barbed wire fence in front of the trench. The whole thing was made to look like a patrol that went out to reconnaissance or to repair barbed wire. Sometimes they were left on the battlefield to deceive the enemy. These dummies were also used to conceal machine gun positions. This fooled the enemy, making him think he was being shot at by a group of soldiers rather than a single machine gun nest. Another way to defeat the enemy sniper was by using inflatable decoys. They were placed on top of the trench parapets and were made to look like a soldier raising his head to observe the surroundings. The advantage of inflatable decoys was that they could be quickly installed and removed. There were also some inflatable tanks and other objects that were used to deceive the enemy. Other than papier-mâché heads, there were even special decoy rounds that were released to attract the enemy sniper's attention. Even though they were called bullets, they were actually just chunks of lead that looked like a standard round. However, they didn't have a detonator, meaning they couldn't explode or fragment. Once they were fired from a rifle, they were heavy enough to be lethal, but they couldn't do much damage. The idea behind them was to attract the attention of the enemy sniper, hoping he would take the bait and start shooting at the decoy round. If he did, the tracer bullet would allow the defenders to locate the sniper and eliminate him. But now, in France, snipers have become much bolder and have taken up positions close to the lines. Sniper fire is so dangerous because no one knows where it comes from. That means that you never can feel quite safe. The only sound a sniper makes is when he takes a careful aim and fires. So there's no warning of an impending shot. That is why we must devise a plan to deal with this evil. Almost a month later, Fuller submitted his report to French, entitled Some Suggestions for Dealing with the Foe's Snipers, which included building artificial dummies and exposing them to the enemy, thereby drawing the sniper's fire. Fuller realized that the enemy sniper was getting into a good firing position, concealed himself, and waited patiently for a suitable target. The only way to deal with this problem was to force the enemy sniper to reveal his position by making him fire at a decoy. The British began buying commercially available papier-mâchés to be used as decoys. These were typically wooden-headed dolls. Soon they realized that those weren't good enough to fool the enemy sniper, and so they needed to find a better solution. As a result, the British started to produce their own dummy heads made of papier-mâché. Papier-mâché was a perfect material for making the decoy because it was cheap, looked realistic, and was easy to transport. The job of making decoy heads was entrusted to camouflage units. They were working in their small improvised workshops on the front lines. There, they made a huge variety of decoy heads with great precision. Some of them were even equipped with rubber surgical tubes connected to the mouth with a cigarette in it. By blowing air through the tube, an impression of a soldier smoking a cigarette was made. This made the decoy even more attractive to the enemy sniper. The best part about papier-mâché heads was that they didn't have to be painted. The material itself looked like real skin. All that was needed was to shape the face. Details, and the dummy head was ready to be used. Of course, these things had to be placed in such a way as to attract the attention of the enemy sniper. Decoy heads were usually stuck on a long stick in order to securely lift it over the parapet. If the deception was successful and the dummy head was hit by a sniper, bullet holes were then used to locate the sniper with the help of a triangulation method. Sometimes the dummy head had a periscope slid inside of it so the observer could see exactly where the sniper was. Soldiers could also place several heads on stakes in a trench opening, making the enemy sniper think there were multiple targets to shoot at. Decoys were also used during the Battle of the Somme in Ypres. They proved to be very useful when the Allied troops advanced and exposed the German snipers to incoming artillery fire. The Germans used the same method. When the Germans decided to use papier-mâché heads, they referred to them as Ballkopfe, meaning balloon heads. The German army even issued field regulations concerning the use of these decoys. They pointed out that the best results were achieved with wooden heads covered in white cloth. The head had to be mounted on a long pole and lifted above the trench parapet, trying to resemble a soldier waving. The German army also had a problem with the Allies using balloons as a form of concealment. The main purpose of these balloons was to carry observation aircraft above the battlefield, but it also served as an excellent hiding spot for snipers. To counter this, the Germans started producing anti-balloon rifles, which were essentially large-bore, high-powered rifles with extra long range. So what began as a battle between snipers and balloon-assisted snipers turned into a battle between snipers and anti-sniper rifles. In the end, both sides realized that this was the wrong way to go about it. And that's why the use of balloons and papier-mâché heads became less common, even though they were widely used during the First World War. The first written records of their use date from the Second World War. During the Battle of Britain, the British produced several dummy heads for use against the Luftwaffe. According to the British Air Ministry, 13,272 complete figures and 21,454 heads were produced between May and October 1940. During the war in the Pacific, the Japanese made similar heads out of papier-mâché and bamboo to deceive American snipers. In some cases, they even filled the heads with nails and spikes to inflict maximum damage on the enemy. At the Siege of Manila, the Filipinos used papier-mâché heads to lure Japanese soldiers into shooting at them, after which they attacked the Japanese with bolos. But in general, the use of papier-mâché heads is most associated with the First World War, when for the first time in history, soldiers faced the horrors of trench warfare. Rifles with telescopic sights were used on a large scale for the first time. As time went on, the scope became smaller and lighter and was attached to more types of rifles.